Welcome to UnstuckAF, a podcast here to help you do you better. There's a path that starts where you are, passes through who you are, and leads where you want to go. We're here to hear from people who've walked that path or who are walking it right now. This is Orlando Bishop, Coach Orlando, and I thank you for listening as we learn how to get unstuck, how to be unstuck, how to live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Welcome to UnstuckAF. I am so pleased to have a conversation with a friend of mine. We keep in some contact via the Facebook posts and occasional messengers, but we don't always get to talk. So Anna Diab, I want to introduce you to folks and give you a chance to say hello and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Orlando. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
My name is Anna. I'm a parent of 3 kids, and
yeah, which is actually what brought us together. We were both parents at a school here called Wish, and actually I coached Anna's son, so we that was our first connection, and we've sort of kept in communication since then. So yeah, we'll talk about that and everything else. As I shared, every interview starts with the same fundamental question, and that is for you. The specific form is how and or when did you know that grief would be a significant part of your life?
For me, I learned just a few years ago that grief would be a significant part of my life when my 11-year-old daughter unexpectedly died while on a family vacation. And I've lost grandparents before. I've experienced touches of death, but nothing that came close to the depth of this loss.
Yeah. And, knew you at the time, and obviously it sent shockwaves through our, general school community. We will talk about what happened, but I guess one of the things that we talked about when we were connecting and deciding to have this conversation was you get from people so strong, I don't know how I would possibly do this, or I could never do this, or what have you. And I just thought that, not having had the specific experience you've gone through, I was a little surprised by that, but then not, like after you said it made all the sense. I'm just curious, as you think about that, as you hear that, what is your reaction to that? What is your feeling around that? From the outside looking in, I'd sound like everybody else, right? Like, wow, like, incredible strength. But I'm sure there are layers to it.
Yeah, and you know what? I think we discussed this, but I probably have said that to someone along the way, or this someone else's story. I could have said something like that. You're so strong. You're so brave. I couldn't do it. And I think there was a period where it almost started to make me angry, and I knew it was coming from a good place. People don't know what to say. There are no right words.
Right.
But it was difficult to hear. I didn't choose to be brave if this is what it meant to be brave. I didn't choose to be strong. I'd rather be weak and non-courageous if I could have my daughter back.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I hear you. So it feels like we're talking around it. Is it okay for me to use her name?
Yeah, yes, please.
So
I like it.
Okay. So yeah, as you mentioned that it was unexpected and losing Carolina, and I guess just so folk have some sense of what you mean by that and some context, could you give us, some of what happened?
Yeah, we were on a huge family vacation to Uganda in Africa. My dad does a big trip every few years, and this was that year's trip just a few years ago. And everything was fine, everyone was fine, and Carolina's never had health issues and woke up one morning with a headache, and we just attributed it to long travel and time
Mm,
jet lag and whatnot. And within, I don't know, maybe 5 6 hours, she she started uh, throwing up. She was nauseous and she went unconscious at the
mm,
lodge we were at. And the camp doctor arranged for us to get to a hospital, and she never regained consciousness. And 14 hours
mm.
later, she was gone.
I mean, even as you say that now, I can, hear in your voice. Um, One of the things we've talked a lot about is community, and
Mm-hmm.
there's the community that is our family, and maybe to start there, um, what, how did you, or did you, take care of one another, like in terms of facing that moment? Because I guess I was part of a slightly broader community we can talk
Mm-hmm.
about too, but yeah, I'm just curious, as you were first navigating what was going on, how did that go for you?
You know, we watched the whole 14 hours. I mean, till the very end. My husband and I were in the hospital. Our two younger sons were back. You know, we were fortunate. My dad was there, and my brother and his girlfriend. And I don't know what we would have done without them, trying
Right.
to deal with medevac and taking care of the boys. But in those first, we had to go back and tell the boys. They were just waiting, and that was the first most daunting task of how do
Yeah.
you go back, and how do we tell them.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then it was just us. We lived in a little bubble ourselves, and I know the community back here at home was
Mm-hmm.
growing and so loving and supportive, but we just had to plow through those days of
Yeah.
logistics and embassies and how to get Carolina home.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess what stands out to you most, I guess, of that time? You talked about the embassies and so on. Is my experience, especially when my dad died, was that I was taking care of a lot of things, but it was also very much a blur. If you
Mhm.
asked me, like, well, who did you pay for this, or who did you hire for that, or what was that, I couldn't possibly. And I know I took care of a ton of stuff,
Yeah.
but it just sort of all became part of the fog. I'm wondering if there's anything that stands out to you, from that immediate time.
I think what really stands out is the little army back here, back home, that was forming.
Mm,
Because it was just logistics, and I don't know either how I figured out plane tickets and handlers and
yeah.
all these things. And when we played with the boys, we bought a football and played catch each day. I mean,
Mm,
it sounds crazy, but we had to do those things just to
sure.
get by. And yet at home, when it was quiet in the night, I'm not a big social media person, but this was kind of the start of me there. And I didn't realize, like, just to get responses and
Mm.
messages from so many people I didn't even know, was I'm that held me during that time.
That's so important, I think, for folks to hear, especially people who haven't been through, this type of experience themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, because, like you say, sometimes it does feel, and I know I've been there where I go, what am I supposed to say? I mean, I
Mm.
don't, that feeling. But having been on the other side, my experience was it was usually much more that someone took a moment to acknowledge than specifically what they chose to say, or you know what I mean. Every once in a while someone said something that was particularly, they had for us. But yeah, so I'm just wondering, yeah, if you could say more about that piece, like what it was like knowing folks were thinking of you, or yeah, what served best in those situations.
I think it was just the reaching out when you didn't know what to say. And it contradicts a little with me saying later I felt almost flustered and irritated when
Mm-hmm.
someone would say maybe some of those just textbook or what seemed like textbook comments. But at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, that didn't matter. Just to have
Mm-hmm.
message after message of names I didn't even recognize were thinking of Carolina. It was, it meant so much to me. And the people who
Mm-hmm.
continue to do that, even now, I'll get messages from people who just say they, I don't know, they saw a butterfly and it made them think of Carolina and they never even knew her. But
Mm-hmm.
it is one of the best things anyone could ever do for me.
It was, for me, do you say about not even knowing? I mean, saw Carolina, but had dealt much
Mm.
more with your son, and um, I have gotten to know her. I feel some through Facebook specifically, but through social media, things you've shared, but also just comments and things that people have said about her in that space. How did you decide to continue the conversation that way? Because I think that's probably a way that you gave people a way, right, to be a community around you.
It wasn't it wasn't purposeful. Maybe now it is purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, the very first time I put it, Carolina had just died. It was maybe 30 minutes, and I didn't know what to do in the middle of the night in a dirt lot of a Ugandan hospital, and I just needed to reach out and scream, and I did it in social media.
Mm.
And I think it just buoyed me, and then I needed a way to thank all these people who had shown up for us and were continuing to show up, and I had this list of thank you cards that I'll never get to. And somehow this doesn't replace it for me, but it lets me know that I appreciate all these people close and those who I barely know.
Yeah.
For continuing to, like you said, getting to know Carolina, even if you didn't know her when
Yeah.
she was physically here, it means a lot. I don't have new stories to tell of her, but if
Right.
someone's interested to know the person that she was, is pretty cool.
It's interesting that you say about not having news stories to tell, because I was gonna ask you to share, a story about her, or in terms of the audience, getting to know her, because I really have enjoyed that process, which may seem like a dark or weird thing to say, but I really have. And I'll see, there's one smiling picture in particular that I'll see and actually feel a little bit of like, oh, let me see like I know something warm and loving is going to be shared. So yeah, I'm just are there stories or thoughts or pieces of Carolina that you would want folks to be aware of?
God, there's so many silly stories. She
Mm-hmm.
was 11, so she was fun and all about finding her friends, just separating that place where her friends are the best things. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
remember, you know, it's easy to remember all the good and fun stuff, but I want to remember all of it. I mean, she and I had started to butt heads, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I talked about that in my eulogy, but we also discussed it, and it was okay. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to remember her as a whole and all the facets of her relationship. She was sneaky with candy, and up to a year later, I found wrappers in her room. She wasn't slick. Um,
Right, right.
yeah, she was thoughtful. She always brought her brother's treats if she went shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned her brothers, and one of the things for me again was that sort of having that experience of like, oh, life just goes on. Like we just keep doing things, and I'm supposed to start doing things at some point. You even mentioned, right away, you bought a football, you're playing catch. What was that piece like for you? I mean, that's another community,
Mm.
right? That's that smaller community we talked about. How did you manage um mothering through that specific grief?
Probably not that well at times. It's it, I have found it really challenging because kids don't grieve the same way we do.
Hmm.
And they were young. They were 9 and 7.
Yeah.
You know, almost 7. My youngest doesn't remember as much, and that has been a source
Mm,
of frustration for me, wishing for him that he would remember more. But we
yeah.
look at TikTok videos, and my middle one, about a year later, really, really struggled.
Mm,
We've done a lot of work with him and him on his own, but that has been hard because I can't do it for him, right? You can do so
yeah.
much for your kids, maybe more than you should, but I can't walk this grief path for him.
Right.
His
Yeah.
relationship was his own.
Mm,
So that has been hard to learn where I need to be supportive of him and recognize he just needs to be, and he just needs to be sad.
do his thing. Yeah. Yeah. Great kid. So I happen to be most familiar with him. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's I'm sure that has been that kind of a challenge. Have you sort of beyond you've dealt with your situation and people interacting with you, has this led at all, like has there been any specific work around grief? I know you've reached out to me at times that I had some things happen in my life, and I appreciated it, as I would generally when someone reaches out, but there was something specific about our exchanges where I felt like, you know,
Mm.
like, right? And so there was just, I don't know, I just felt a sense of understanding, and I'm wondering if that's been a part of your experience more broadly. Do you find that when others are having their difficulties or have had their losses, that this experience has informed how you now show up?
I think so. I think I've always been open, and people have in general felt comfortable coming to me, but I think there must be something that maybe became a little more vulnerable and allowed people,
Mm.
because I get maybe deeper stuff that people come with, and it
Mm.
allows me in turn to open up and be more open and sharing.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering about your just, we sort of meet you here even in this
Mhm.
conversation, 3 kids and so on. I'm curious about your own, your own story and how and where you grew up and how you ended up, on the west side of Los Angeles with some lunatic running around yelling at your son about the deep path and
He needed that. Um, I was born in Oregon, and then basically grew
Mhm.
up in the Bay Area outside San Francisco, and went to UCLA. Swore I was going to go to the East Coast, but that just didn't pan out, and
Mhm.
I am still here. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So didn't think I'd end up here, but met my husband,
Yeah.
and life life fell into place here.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. And do you, I mean, we haven't even had this conversation, I realize, like, are you a full-time mom, or do you have other work you do? Like, we haven't even I just realized it as I started to ask about it. I was like, I don't even know what I'm about to ask about.
I do work part-time. I worked up
Mhm.
until Carolina was born. I thought I would go back to work, and it just didn't. We didn't find a way to make that happen with that
Mhm.
company. So I stayed home for a few years, and then realized I am not an stay at home all mom all the time person. I really missed my own my own sphere that was just mine.
Mhm.
So I've been back part-time only, but it's given me a balance of wanting to do a lot with the kids, and I'll have the opportunity to be present, but I also need something that's adult.
Yeah, yours.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
They're lots of fun, and then also,
Sometimes.
yeah, I get that piece. I'm wondering for you, obviously, there's a life trauma we've talked
Mm.
about, we've touched on. I'm wondering if for you, where you'd want to get to, or maybe you're to where you'd want to get to in terms of how you're processing grief, you personally, like you
Mm.
mentioned with your son needing to, also interact with others, but for you personally, I'm wondering what would you view or how would you describe healthy grieving, or in a healthy way moving through this process?
I've wondered that so many times. I don't know where if I'm where I want to be. I don't quite know what that is. I think, well, I think ultimately I would like to find Carolina, whatever that means. I'm not hugely religious, so I don't
Mm-hmm.
have a firm basis of belief that I know she's somewhere, but
Mm-hmm.
I think I believe she's out there, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to, as a parent, you always know where your children are, and I don't know where she is, and how to connect with her.
Yeah.
So, but I know it takes work, and so I mean, right away we started family grief therapy. I said, we're just going to do it. I know there's work, and I don't know what the work is, but we're going to
Mm-hmm.
do it. And after a year, everyone petered off, and I joined a grief group. My husband
Mm-hmm.
wasn't into it with other
Mm-hmm.
parents who had lost children, and we were probably together for 2 years. It was over COVID, so it took a lot longer to gel. There
Yeah.
were times I liked it, there were times I didn't, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it did help me continue moving forward, keeping Carolina
Right.
part of a conversation, and I I want to keep continuing that path that has worked for me. I'm
Yeah.
really involved with her friends, and even though I don't know where to find her, I feel like she must be with them.
Yeah. As they were important to her. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, and when you were in the group, you
Mhm.
mentioned, you're being able to speak about her. Yeah, I'm curious about that dynamic because again, I think sometimes folks' instinct is move on with life. Let's not talk about it. Of course, we're sad. We got to move on. Let's go, go, go. Having tried some of that, I'm not a huge fan of that approach. But I get that some folks do choose that. I'm curious what all you would. I mean, the talking about her, and I'm curious about that piece. But how else it served you, fed you, to be a part of that grief group and to have a body of people who it wasn't just in the abstract they'd experience a
Mhm.
loss. That's a very specific kind of loss.
It was interesting because there were the broad range of people. There were people like me who wanted to keep staying present as best I could, and it was an opportunity to share Carolina with people who never met her and will never meet her.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the similar type of loss, had a genuine interest in sharing all these children who are no longer on this earth. And but then there was all those people who they showed up, but they didn't want to talk and they didn't want to share and they didn't want
Mm-hmm.
anybody to reach out to them. And it was just so different than how I was experiencing my grief at that time, and probably and still so. Um,
Yeah.
so it helped give me some reassurance that maybe I was doing what was right for me. I didn't want to
Right.
shut it all off.
You seem so clear about the very personal nature of navigating slash managing grief. You mentioned that the group worked for you, not as much for your husband. You mentioned that your middle son, sort of needs to walk his journey. I'm wondering if you started out with that understanding, or if that's developed over the course of things. But you seem to have a real clarity of like this works for me, doesn't have to work for anybody else. Um, and I think sometimes in families, my own experience has been that folks who process differently can get to where they almost insist that others process their way,
Mm.
as opposed to making the kind of room it seems like you've made.
I've stumbled a lot. I think the only thing that became apparent right away, I mean, maybe within a month or two, was my husband and I could grieve side by side, but we couldn't go to one another. It was too heavy. So when
Mm-hmm.
almost everything, if you were in a supportive relationship, you would go to that person to lean on, or to, you know, be buoyed up when you're down. And we
Yeah,
couldn't. We both, without saying it, realized we couldn't do that for one another, but we could
yeah,
just sit there and cry quietly and know that that was the limit of support, and that was okay.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
okay.
That's powerful. Yeah, it's truly powerful. I guess I would ask you've spoken about Carolina's friends, and I
Mhm.
know that at different points, I mean, when I was at the funeral, I was, obviously, I should say obviously, but I was deeply impacted um, by the way her friend showed up, and that was myriad ways, not just physically being there, but I think they made their feelings clear. um and and I'm curious about that keeping in touch. I could imagine the same way you said some parents didn't want to speak, some parents did share. Some, I would imagine some parents would be, don't show me anybody who they knew, I don't want, right? And then others
Yeah.
would go in another direction. I'm curious what that's been like for you and what you've gotten from them specifically, because I think the adult community is one thing,
Mhm.
but I think her friends, I've gotten a sense from you on a couple of occasions that that particular piece is important to you.
It is. I mean, from right off the bat, for the funeral, I said these 8 girls need to be in the front row. I mean, I asked them first if that was too
Of
much,
course,
but
of course.
I want them up there. Carolina wants them up. Like they needed to be as close
Mhm.
to her physically as they could. And, it was time wise very inconvenience, not the right word, but COVID hit just a few months after Carolina died. And the world,
Mhm.
even though my world had stopped, right? You mentioned it earlier that, you get this hole or the world stops and you look around and no one else's world stopped. But the world
Mm,
kind of did stop. And we all had to pause and
right.
really choose who we were going to spend our time with. And for us, it was quite a safe space as far as losing Carolina, that her friends just became our bubble and they reached out to me and with
Wow.
text messages and funny stories and um, they are the most amazing. I don't know that I can ever understand how they rose to this occasion at 11
Mm,
years old. I mean,
yeah.
they never should have had to, and they did, and they continue to, and they were open with me, and I was open back with them, and it just formed these wonderful little relationships that they include me, and for me, it keeps Carolina alive. I think if I got cut off from their lives,
Hmm.
she would die even more.
Mm. Yeah. Is there a lot of as you say that, is there sort of trying to think of the right word. Oh, well, we just talked about graduation and
Hmm.
them acknowledging and so on. Maybe you can share a little bit about that, but I'm curious if that opportunity to just sort of like observe that, it gives you a way to sort of continue to process yeah, or how that piece serves, I guess, is what I'm trying to find.
I It keeps Carolina alive and present in some way for me to know that, of course, she's with me and our immediate family, but to know that she's being carried off into the world in the minds and thoughts and hearts of not even her closest friends, but so many. I mean, they just had their 8th grade culmination, and it wasn't just her friends. So many of the classmates who were impacted, who weren't so close with her or our family, they
Mm.
included her in a slideshow and a moment of silence, and they hung a tassel with her picture. So many of the kids, and it just was so. They've been so inclusive of our family and allowing us to continue on with them, even if we don't have Carolina here.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I know we're mid conversation, but I do want to thank you. I know it's not obviously an easy conversation, and I really appreciate your generosity around it. I'm wondering if you were advising, whether it's someone, and maybe it would be specifically someone who's lost a child, but someone who maybe has experienced a loss that is, um I don't feel like devastating is an inappropriate word, if that's an okay word to use.
Yeah.
um yeah, what would you share around whether it's do this, don't do that, look out for X? I mean, are there things that you now in a specific way can impart, at least based on your own experience?
Ooh, that's a tough one, Orlando. I I I know one thing that was told to me was that the grief the grief will change. It will morph. It won't be that unrelenting
Yeah.
waves of emotion that it was really marching through that entire first year.
Yeah.
But although I find that helpful and I can understand it now, I don't know that it was received in the way that I can take it in now at the time, because
Hmm.
to tell me that it was going to change, it won't always be like this, even though I never wanted to live like that the rest of my life, it also
Sure.
meant whenever I get to that point, we're farther away from the days when Caroline was here. So it
Yeah.
was hard to like hope to be even more removed from her.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I guess the grief in some ways that there is there's almost like it's a connection, but it's almost more than a connection, right? It's like a tangible thing that almost that feels like that's happening. You do a thing, you feel it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It ties
yeah.
you to your child or to whoever it is that you're so
Hmm.
crushed with losing. I think it ties you, and it needs to initially, but I knew I didn't want that forever. I don't want
Yeah.
my life to be, it's always going to be colored with this loss with Carolina not
Hmm.
here, but I don't want my life completely defined by it.
Sure.
I don't want to live that way.
Yeah. Now you did move, right? And you even talked about well the first year and I'm curious what are some of the things you found most key? You talked about being in the group, but
Mhm.
yeah, were there particular approaches or reframing things in a certain way, or did you periodically have an activity you do to sort of deal, how I had a friend, well, friend of my sister's, but I knew
Mhm.
them, and they lost a child. Really, bizarre accident. The kid bit an electric cord. Why that kid decided to bite an electric cord,
Gosh.
no one will ever know, but that's what happened. And obviously, that family went through a lot. And I remember my sister telling me that on the child's birthday, they went out to the park and released balloons.
Mhm.
And I was, it was like one of those things like I just found myself sitting with. Like I was like, huh, I get it. Would I go release balloons? Like what, like, you know what I mean? Like, wow, like I get you figure, well, we got to do something. We can't just sit here. So there were moments like that stand out to me in stories I've heard. I'm just
Mhm.
curious, whether it was holidays or it was, you know, Taco Tuesday or whatever that you would, were there, how did you manage those, or did that play into your ability to start not moving away from Carolina, but maybe moving away from that initial overwhelming grief?
Yes, I knew we had to celebrate her. Every day couldn't
Hmm.
be sad, and
Right.
the day of the anniversary of her death was going to be sad. I didn't know how to celebrate, but she loves birthdays like it's her
Hmm.
job, and her birthday especially. And so what was hard for us was her birthday's on Christmas Eve, the 24th, and she died on the 29th. So that
Right.
is a really terrible stretch of a week. And we went into, I mean, the first year doesn't even, I don't even remember. It was high COVID, we couldn't do much, but we
Hmm.
decided we need to have a party. She always was into her
Hmm.
party, and it was some unique absurd idea. um and she never had her birthday in December, and the December that she died, she got her birthday that 2 weeks before her party, and I'm so glad she did. So
Yeah.
we celebrate her. I take her girlfriends came over for lunch, and I don't remember if we sang happy birthday to her, and I took them out to lunch. So
Yeah.
we celebrate. We decorate her. There's a square that the city of LA named or
Hmm.
dedicated to her,
Oh
right
wow.
outside the school. Yeah, and we decorate it every year on her birthday, or the past 3 years, and
Sure.
it's really nice. I think she'd like it.
Yeah. I love that. Glad I asked. That's truly beautiful.
It
Um
is.
so I you've been, as I mentioned before, you've been very, you have personally been very supportive of me, and some loss that I've navigated. I'm wondering if I'm wondering if we can find a way to, it's not systematize because every situation's a little bit different. But you're really good at it. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like I just felt
Thank
that
you.
you just reached out and I just more so like allowed me to know somebody cared. You didn't try to fix it or uncork some wisdom that was gonna straighten it all out. But I do feel like if folks had a sense that like basically the ABCs, right? Of what would that what might that be? What are the things that are most helpful to communicate? I know you mentioned that people saying certain things would be irritating, and I found. And looking back, I was like, I'm not sure there's much certain people. I'm not sure there's much people could say that wouldn't have irritated me when I was having some of that experience. But yeah, I guess yeah, I'm wondering if what helped most. Like when did you feel most embraced, cared for, loved by the community as you were going through all this?
People, the fact that people just kept showing up, not only for me, but for our family. And it wasn't, the heavy showing up at the beginning with meals or flowers. I mean, that was all amazing. But when for lack of a better word, the excitement of the high of a funeral and having her party afterwards died down and the out of town guests went home, there were people who continued to show up in the tiniest ways. And I remember when I joined the grief group and the facilitator said, you're going to lose friendships in addition to this loss, but you're also going to gain some beautiful ones. And I couldn't understand what it meant at the time. But I really do now, because the people who have continued to show up, who it's a text message, it could be a little note on our door, it could be an email, it could be a post on Carolina's page. It doesn't matter what it was, but the ones who just continue to remind me that they're out there and that Carolina is remembered. Yeah, by far that's what I would tell someone. Just show up, keep showing up.
Show up over time. Yeah. That's I guess with a lot of big ceremonies, that's the deal, right? I once heard a reverend talk about that when he was doing a sermon at a wedding. And he said, oh yeah, today everybody's here, it's a big great time, but that's all gonna die down. It's gonna be the two of you. You're gonna have to figure this out. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, it's no different than a wedding. It's the same high and low. Absolutely.
Yeah, when the people gather. So I guess just where are you now? Like we talked about where you wanted to end up, and you've said not 100% sure, but you're moving forward. You're grief group, so on. You're doing the processing. Where do we find you now? We're about 3.5 years.
Yeah, just about. Yeah. Wow. It's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, I imagine. If you like in terms of where you are now, like I know people talk about like the stages of grief, and it's not anywhere near that orderly, I understand. Right. But as you think about where you are now in terms in relationship to that immediate aftermath, or just, where you see yourself going, I'm just curious to hear from you on that.
I mean, as I was told, the grief has morphed so much. I still have my moments. There are still waves or triggers that approach unexpectedly. But there's a calmness to it. It's more just like this dull, deep ache that kind of lives. inside, but
Mm.
it doesn't always have to be sad. It
Mm.
can be, but it can be, I don't know what the word is. It's not okay, but it doesn't always have to be sad. It's not always
Mm-hmm.
tears.
Yeah.
Um, I want to be present. I want my boys to live. I want them
Mm-hmm.
to have, just as magical of a life as she did.
Mm-hmm. You can take a moment. You're all
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah. um you meant you we as we talked, one of the things that I talked about was I like to think about the kind of music
Mhm.
that folks like, and in terms of creating the music for the show. And you mentioned Taylor Swift. There's been all this fuss, the
So much
last
fuss.
year, I guess, right, about the ticket to the right.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I'm curious. I'm just curious to hear, about Carolina and Taylor Swift, and did she have a favorite song, or was she one for singing along, or I'd like to hear about that fandom.
She would sing along. I don't know if she had a favorite song, but it was where she was at when she died. So we've kind of incorporated Taylor Swift songs alongside her, whether it was fifth grade culmination or
Hmm.
family get-togethers. There's a Taylor Swift throw-in. She went to a concert and was over the moon.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go this summer for her.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Will it be in LA? I don't
Yes,
know where the dates are. Okay.
everywhere. But
I,
yes, we'll be in LA.
I offered, I offered up, I had made a promise years ago,
Hmm.
to my now 18-year-old. And, I said, well, offer's still good. And, apparently Taylor Swift is in our rear view,
Oh,
is
she's
in our
over.
rear view
Well,
mirror at this point. So yeah, so I got turned down. I got turned down flat.
you
Uh,
saved yourself a chunk of money. Yeah,
So I'm hearing. So I'm
yeah.
hearing. That's amazing. Enjoy.
Thank you.
If you think to snap a picture, I'd love to see you.
Sounds good.
Um, yeah, that's great. I was well. You answered. I was gonna ask like what your relationship is now, but to be going to the concert, that's incredibly beautiful. Um, I guess the final piece in terms of a question
Mhm.
is, if you well, actually, in two directions. I was going to ask. I'm going to change where I was going to go. So you can go back to December 29th, 2019. It's huge. It's the initial. Is there anything you would whisper in your ear at that point?
Ooh, gosh, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I know there's an exercise where I'm open to a lot of things, but there's an exercise
Hmm.
therapy related where you write a letter to yourself from your child, which makes your question makes me think
Mm.
of that. And I I don't know if I'm yet able to ponder that
Yeah.
or what I could have told myself in that moment because I
Yeah.
until that last minute I
Yeah.
didn't think we'd be going home without her or not the same way.
Well, it's unthinkable, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the kind of thing we literally describe that way. And if also not sure, fine, but
Mm.
just I guess forward,
Yeah.
there's gonna be a version of you in another 3.5 years. And
Mhm.
it seems like with all the work you're doing, there will be more morphing. Is there any message you have or question for that version of you, or something you anticipate for that moment, just as you look to it?
I hope that that person, future me, continues to do right by. I know I'll keep doing right by Carolina, but I hope I keep doing right by myself too. Uh,
Mm.
I think you know, there's self-care comes into this too, and it's I'm just learning. I think I'm just at a place, getting to a place, or having just arrived at the place where I can maybe learn how to balance a little bit. How can I go back to being the parent that you know, it's always a work in progress for parents, but how can I get back to a place where I'm present, or I feel like I'm just becoming present properly the way I want to with the kids, but also keep Carolina here. And it's different. She doesn't have activities, but keep her woven into the things that we do as a family, and in my life, but then also move forward. You know, I had that sphere when I didn't want to be a full stay-at-home mom. I want to have that sphere too. I still think it's important. Sure. I'm still here. I need to, you know, I want to live right by myself for however many years I still have.
Yeah. And you mentioned the self-care piece specifically. Are there things you do in particular or that you've begun to do in terms of that?
Working out's always been a big one for me. I think it's always been known to be mentally just such a release. And I think I let go of that a little bit. It was easy to sit and not do something, or to sit and feel sad. And I've gotten back to working where I want to be in that department. Yeah. Anything in particular, or sort of whatever the spirit calls? Running's my favorite, but that's where I fell the biggest off the wagon. So
I get it. I'm getting going myself. So okay, we can encourage each other.
Deal.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I continue to be, and I won't say it. I'm not gonna say it. The strength. I'm not gonna say that.
You can say it one time.
But no, I really, I've really admired, honestly, how you've navigated the posts you share, even the stories you share today, and you know, interacting with Carolina's friends and so on. Part of why I wanted to have this conversation is I knew how difficult it had been, from just in terms of what you'd shared, but I also saw that you were, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but I'll use it, in the fight. It felt like you were, that's the way I talk about, because I talk about everything like it's a big fight. But you know, I was like, you're in the fight. Like, I didn't see you like turning away from it, or like, you know, I'm fine, right? I saw you going, nope, some moments I'm fine, some moments I'm not fine, and depending on which moment you catch me in, that's what you're gonna get. And I really appreciated that. I think it's helpful to others who go through it, because it can look, depending on what people do, it can look like, well, everybody else just sort of like picks up and moves on and is fine, and I don't know that that's as much the case as folks would have us sometimes believe. So I've really found it beautiful, and I do appreciate it, and I really do admire you for it.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll we will talk soon. I'll be on the lookout. Enjoy your Taylor Swift.
Thank you. I'll send a picture.
We'll connect soon. Take care.
Okay. Thanks so much, Orlando. Bye.
Bye-bye. You know what time it is. It's time to walk the line. Now, this time we're going to bring a lot of things together as we walk the line. And here's what I want you to do. Join We Align. That's your walk the line for this episode. And here's why. Okay? Or here's what inspired me to put this here and talk about it this way. Anna tells a powerful story, and she extends some powerful ideas, and she gives us some things to work with. But the thing that struck me as we were having our conversation, and as I thought about it, and as frankly, and to be honest, as I put off even creating this walk the line, because I was just sort of wrestling with the enormity of losing Carolina and what that meant in the community, and seeing this person who I very much respect and care about, and the pain that she's managed, and the light she's tried to bring to and through the world as that's happened. It was a lot. And then it hit me that it's about community. So much of this is about community. It was about community. when Anna posted on Facebook, knowing I need to scream, and I know there's some people out there who will hear my scream. It was about community when they bought a football, and in the first moments of figuring out what their family was gonna look like with Carolina no longer physically present, that they were able to throw that football and figure out how they were gonna come together. It was this community that put those friends in the front seat of that church. It was community that put that church to overflow, and I was one of the people who was there. It's community that gets those Facebook messages sent back and forth between those of us who are managing our pain over loss or otherwise. It allows us to connect. Somebody said to me once that that's the thing about the people in our lives. They multiply our joy and divide our grief. And so I want you to understand that we are truly building community, and I'm watching it happen. I always want it to happen faster. It's the coach in me, and I get that part, okay? But it is truly happening as people come together, as people encourage one another in terms of the work that we're doing. It's all going down, and I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be somebody who's in there being helped up, told about the butterfly somebody saw one day, and I want you to be the person who's extending that hand, thinking of what to say, biting your tongue maybe when some praise about their strength or whatever that you know isn't quite going to land the way you intend it comes, and that you reach even deeper. And maybe just to say, I'm here. But it's all so incredibly important. It's about community, and it's what we've built, it's what we're building. There's so much more that we are in the process of putting in place, in the process of doing. Get in on the conversation. Let's be that community, being our best selves, living our best lives, even through the darkest nights, even through the most difficult hours. Join We Align. And I'll add, it's free. There's a subscription section that we're going to be talking about more, but it's free. You can come and join the conversation. You can share your thoughts. You can comment on the memes and the TED Talks and the song. But I want you in there because as I talk to people, as I meet them, whether it's at a dinner party or somebody sends them my way to be a potential client, it's amazing to me the number of people who really just could use and are longing for that connection, longing for that person who maybe is going to be a cheerleader when they are needing to go for it, or that person who's going to help them talk through the plan, or that person who's going to say, that is a very, very bad idea, totally misaligned to what you presented, and I really would recommend that you not do it. Community. Come together. We align. We will see you for season 4. And right now, what I'm gonna do is share the song I created to just try to capture some of the joyful spirit that Anna shared with us, that she told us about, as we even are reminded that even in death, we have this sense that Carolina is still seeking community, that she is still in some way connected to her friends, in some way connected to her family. Kind of stories we could tell, but the bottom line is this: we support one another. We put in the work. We show compassion and empathy and yes, love. We align. Get thee over there. Everything else can be discussed from there. I appreciate 3 seasons. I'm looking forward to the 4th. Y'all, you know how it's gotta end. Cause we gon' get unstuck. We gon' be unstuck. We gon' live unstuck. Unstuck.